Hello and welcome to the Space Madness Podcast. This is your host, Jeff Nosanov, my assistant Wednesday, with us today. And we're up to episode 42. And today we have with us Oscar Garcia, who is the principal of a very interesting company called Interflight Global. And we're going to be talking about some subjects in the aviation and aerospace world that are really not as well understood, not as often mentioned as I think they should be. Basically, the rapid kind of merging between airspace and space, aviation and space exploration, and all of the interesting technology and travel and regulatory and financial opportunities as the two worlds kind of come together. So with that, Oscar, thank you for joining me. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Interflight Global, and then I'd like to do my usual thing, which is go back, get the story of your career and so on. So Interflight Global.
Thank you, Jeff. It's an honor and a privilege to be here in your podcast. And indeed, Interflight Global is my company. We are based in Miami, Florida. We have offices in Boulder, Colorado, and Luxembourg in the European Union. Interflight Global does something very interesting, which is what I call a translating job. We are in between technology and capital. So our team understands very well the flight technology, both air and space flight, but we also understand very well the capital and finance markets that are required to enable both air and space industries. So we are advisors, consultants, and also investors in air and space enterprises, and we sit somewhere in between the capital and the enterprises that receive that capital.
Wonderful. I really like that, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because it really goes back to a moment I had at NASA about 15 years ago when we were competing for, I think, $20 million for a CubeSat mission. And I remember I had this moment after probably staring at a proposal for 4 hours where I thought, why are we competing for such a tiny fraction of the NASA budget, which is itself small and inadequate and constantly changing? There must be more capital out there to do the things that we know we can do and improve the world and deliver products and services. I mean, that really started my interest in the financial side of things. So I'm thrilled to chat with you. So another thing is hopefully we'll get to talk about, like I said, the air and space traffic management, the future of air travel, and point-to-point Earth, space, transportation, all that stuff. All those things are really closer to reality than I think a lot of people realize. So I want to get there, but first, as I always do, love to go back with you. Your early interest in aviation, really, I know you were an engineer first, but where did your interest in aviation come from? How did you get here?
Well, thank you, Jeff. That's a great question. I'm a second generation aviation professional. I was born in an airline family. My dad was an airline captain. So at a very young age, I was fully immersed in the world of air transportation, aircraft, maintenance facilities, airports. So at a very young age, I started flying airplanes and teaching other people to fly airplanes. My undergraduate studies are aerospace engineering in California, San Diego State University. And I started my career as an airline pilot. I started flying the airlines in the U.S. and moved on to international carriers at the end of my career. And by then I was also involved in the management of the airlines. And after an MBA with Embry-Riddle University, I jumped full-time into consulting and advisory, again, trying to help airlines, airport suppliers, and engineers, and the whole ecosystem of aerospace understand the capital needs required to make demand signals from the market into realities of products and services that answer those demands. And that, in a nutshell, Jeff, is what Interflight Global does. We try to bring in the capital required to answer demand signals from the market via great products and technology, both in air and space transportation.
Okay. So you mentioned how old were you when you started flying planes?
I think I should not say, because my dad put me also small planes, big planes at a very young age. So I don't want to, even though he's living a happy life, I won't tell you how young I was before I took it of an airliner. But professionally, I started flying at 17 years old, and I line transport pilot license at 20, which means I have to wait for a year for legally able to exercise my airline transport pilot privileges. But flying is in my blood. I still do fly different airplanes, aerobatics, general aviation. I do test and do reviews of new aircraft as well occasionally. It's in my blood. But later in life, I understood that to fly safely, to fly efficiently, reliably, put new technologies into the market, we need both two things. We need fuel, but we need fuel as well.
Sure.
I tell my son, what makes an airplane fly? Well, it's money.
Yeah.
And a lot of other things. So for the last 20 years or so, we've been focused on translating again the language of technology.
Well, thank you. I mean, and space is the same. I mean, you're basically using capital as propulsion and fuel and everything else at the end of the day. So another thing they have in common. So I want to go back to one question. I do, of course, want to get to the present, but you mentioned you have an aerospace engineering degree and then you became a professional pilot. My understanding is that's less common of a career path, right? I mean, many pilots, they go through pilot training without engineering training. I'm curious how you found that, how you made that choice.
Well, I made that choice, and I have my aerospace engineering background is mixed with an applied technologies background. I realized at a very early stage that my flight career and professional pilot training could be taken for credit as part of my engineering. So I combined both activities, and engineering applied to flying made me a better airline pilot.
Okay.
And however, I have to say, Jeff, that some of the very good pilots I know in the industry have also an engineering background.
Okay.
Allows you to understand the fundamentals of the vehicle you fly a little bit better. But the applied technology element that I completed credits for in my undergraduate degree helped me translate pure technology into applications into the commercial civil airline world. And I think that's very important for anybody listening to this podcast, looking at new technologies. Technology on itself, if it doesn't have an application that clearly answers demand signal from somebody, it becomes just simply technology for academic purposes, bragging rights. But make sure capital can be injected. Technology, the application of the technology needs to be very, very evident. That's what we do at IFG. We try to unveil the applicability. And my background is aerospace engineering and applied technology.
Sure.
So that's where everything started, Jeff.
Okay. Well, I love that advice because it's so important for engineers. I've made my own mistakes in the past with what I call, hey, look what we can do, which is building something because we can, without the end user or business case or different vocabulary for that along the way. And a lot of engineers, I think, the more pure kind of engineering someone is, the harder it is to kind of through the application and the process and the regulatory and everything else, because you get so excited genuinely about what you can build. So very good advice. So you mentioned new technologies a few times so far. I wonder maybe we could move on to what are the new technologies that I think that you find most exciting emerging in the market now or in the lab, and where do you see them entering service in the near future?
There's so many of them, Jeff, but let me narrow down to an area that I'm very passionate about from the airline world and having flown internationally in jet aircraft across the world. An area that I think we are seeing breakthroughs and I'm very, very interested in is propulsion, aircraft and spacecraft propulsion. That area is unveiling the possibility of flying across the world in an order of magnitude less time. So 20 hours, 2 hours in an aircraft or a spacecraft. And that's thanks to propulsion. I think the aerostructures, airframes, spacecraft, guidance systems, navigation, all of that is pretty much there. What is breaking through for the first time is propulsion power plants that can efficiently, safely, sustainably, and economically propel those vehicles, whether a hypersonic aircraft or a rocket, a suborbital rocket. So in that sense, in the air-breathing world, we are seeing amazing breakthroughs with combined cycle and advanced regime engines that can start from a standing still, go very fast, and then slow down and go back to a standing still, just like an airplane. And when it comes to rockets, well, I have to mention SpaceX Starship is a great example with the Merlin engines. They're starting to become turbine engines, reliable, safe, efficient, a little bit too noisy for now, but that's okay. Get better. So if you ask me what is the focus enabler of technology, not only in point-to-point, but also for space exploration, the moon, Mars, is propulsion.
Well, one of the things, excuse me, one of the things I enjoyed most about our first conversation a few months ago was the way you talk about air travel and space travel for passenger travel as really not, you don't really describe the barrier between them that I think a lot of people intuitively think is there. You describe a world where we're going to have hypersonics and point-to-point rockets, as in you get on a rocket, you go up, you land somewhere else, and that's your trip. You describe that in a very pragmatic way as something that is around the corner. And I think that is really not on the mind of most of the public. I don't think most people realize or think have any idea how close we are to that. And I'm just thinking about my neighbor who works for Delta, who I'm sure will listen to this. He took me on a tour of the enormous facility at Atlanta Airport in December, the maintenance facility. And as we're talking, I look forward to going back someday when there's rocket engines there too, in addition to the jet engines. So I think I want to go a little deeper into this question. Can you go into more detail about why you have that confidence that soon we will see that order of magnitude reduction, whether you book a flight and it's either a rocket or a hypersonic plane, and maybe in the future you don't even care because that's just the way you get where you're going. So what gives you that confidence? Because I haven't seen it elsewhere, but I see generally the technology themes, and I want to make sure we get to the root of it.
Yes, well, I have a very personal theory about it, as we spoke about, Jeff, and it has to do with the humankind perception of time and speed. When you look at the digital world, this video conferencing, you look at computing power, you look at how fast we calculate, how fast we design on computers, and how that speed of computing and digital communications and interactions has increased in the last 4 decades, and is increasing. Actually, we're talking about quantum computing, 2 orders of magnitude, AI, 3 orders of magnitude at different levels. I think what we are looking at is a slingshot effect. We are all pushing for speed digitally, and at this point in time, people are starting to say, hold on, why is physical transportation lagging so far behind? We're flying at the speeds we were 60 years ago when the first jets were in service. In fact, the first jets in service were quicker than some of the jets we'll see in service in 2050. But I think what is happening is that there's been this location of time and speed expectations. The digital world is pushing forward. The physical world remains where it is. The mainstream public, people are starting to say, hey, if I can talk to somebody on a video call in Sydney, Australia, but I need to sit down and have a meeting in person with that person, why does it still take me 24 hours? So that's what I call the slingshot effect. The mainstream public now is starting to say, hey, can you couple the physical world communications and transportation with the digital world advancements? And I feel that more and more have to say the mainstream public for the first time, thanks to you and myself and others that are saying it is possible to fly faster, are starting to react and tell their airlines, hey, could this flight be a little bit quicker than 10, 12, 15, 20 hours? So I think this decade ahead with the technology advances and the demand signal from the public saying, hey, we want to be in a physical, quicker world, just like with a digital world. My thesis is that it's going to be the mainstream demand signal, what I call politely, for speed, right? That is going to trigger and unleash the budgets necessary, both public and private, and the hybrid budget to demonstrate, to start demonstrating and then industrialize the capability.
So I love the answer because it's sort of a business framed answer. It's that the demand is there. It's not the question of whether the universe will allow us to do this, right? Whether the laws of physics and engineering allow us to do this. And in the NASA side, I think about that a lot is, what can we do with the laws of physics as we know them? But we already know that we can do this kind of transportation in rockets and hypersonics. It's a question of adapting them to the economics of passenger air travel, right? So I like that. I find that really inspiring. Now, I want to pose a counterpoint, just to be thorough, which is my understanding, and I may be wrong, but that isn't it the case, at least in Europe, that the low cost carriers are growing enormously. So that would seem to me that the cost demand, the lower cost demand is there. So I'm sure that that is just a zoomed in piece of the context, but that's what comes to mind. So how do you see that in the larger context of the global demand signals for air travel?
Great. That's a great question and structural thesis of what's happening today. Let me start with a data point that your audience listening to us would find interesting. We are 8 billion people on Earth, and out of 8 billion, only 20%, 1.6 billion, have ever set foot on a commercial airline. That data point, which was simple as it sounds, was very revealing to me years ago, shows that the existing air transportation industry has tremendous room to growth. For growth. The statistics show 5 billion people did different travel segments. By 2050, we expect 15 billion travel segments across the world. So the growth is double the global GDP. So the existing air transportation speed equation is the base of a very, very large pyramid growing.
Okay.
What we're discussing when we talk about high speed, and I sometimes use, now that you talk about Europe, the train system, railways in Europe. You have two systems in Europe. You have the railway system and you have the high-speed railway system. And they both coexist very well. The base of the railway system is very, very, very wide and growing and connecting points. But the high-speed system is kind of a higher level of speed for those who need it.
Okay.
And they don't fight each other. Is the tip of the pyramid is high speed, the bottom of the pyramid is low speed.
Okay.
We are looking at something similar. The base of the air transportation pyramid, like you said, the low-cost carriers still got 5 or 6 billion more people to address.
Okay.
The high-speed element is what I call the top of the pyramid. But if the top of a pyramid grows, guess what? The top grows. That's where the high-speed transportation segment starts. However, I like to be also as passionate and enthusiastic I am about it. I'm also very realistic. The existing air transportation system today is so safe, reliable, understood, and infrastructured around that inserting the high-speed element might not be a bolt-on immediate module. We might need a period of time where this technology, supersonic, hypersonic, and suborbital, is matured for what we call special missions, national security, humanitarian operations, governmental operations. The safety levels that the public expects from those as vehicles needs to be mature, needs about a decade of use in things other than selling tickets or what we call common carriage, in order to mature the safety standards to the same level as subsonic transportation. So we have a decade where we are going to see these vehicles enter service, but not necessarily directly into buying a ticket to Sydney and back the same day. It might be more like bringing in a critical piece of equipment to a nuclear plant where that is costing millions every minute that is disabled. And in that process, we'll build maturity, heritage, reliability. So the next decade will be very, very exciting. But we all know, and I'm sure this audience listening knows, that safety standards will grow, but there are risks. And for some critical special mission, the risk tolerance is higher than for the businessman going to Tokyo to close a deal and back to New York.
Right. Well, I always assumed that things have been relatively stable speed-wise for 60 years because frankly, it took 30 of those years to make it as safe as it is today, right? And we don't really want to mess with that. And as a traveler, I agree. Now, there's all kinds of questions that came to mind while you were talking, but I want to share a brief story, which is that I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska for 1 year. And you may know this as an aviation professional, but Lincoln, Nebraska has a very interesting airport, has a very long runway that was built for a space shuttle emergency landing runway. So it's extremely long, and it was right in the middle of the country. And of course, if they overshot California and they undershot Florida, they could have landed, because the space shuttle was a glider. So you really are stuck with your re-entry velocity and angle. I should say the space shuttle in the atmosphere is a glider. And so when I lived there, when you go to the airport there, the runway's longer than the entire city, which is a very strange experience depending on how you approach the airport. And for an airport that's closed 3 days out of the week, it seems really strange. But it seems to me a infrastructure like that might be the ideal place to start experimenting. For example, if you have a hypersonic vehicle that needs a longer airport or a longer runway than you have at, let's say, Chicago, you could land it at Lincoln and then take a shorter jet and maybe still save 6 hours. So my next question, among many, is these technologies, they're probably going to require infrastructure investment. And some places that will be possible, some places not. Like, I don't think you can make the JFK runways any longer, but you also can't put a rocket launch pad there either. I guess this is more of an observation about which I'm interested in your perspective, that many of these technologies are going to require infrastructure changes that may make different parts of the country and the world very active that have never been before, if you need a giant runway for your hypersonic jet or whatever it is. So your thoughts on that? I mean, I imagine this could lead to a lot of interesting changes around the country.
Yeah, yes. Jeff, you're touching on something that is fascinating, and I think will trigger the imagination and also interest of a lot of people listening.
Mm.
You bring up two very interesting things. One is the possibility of a new centers of gravity on Earth for real estate development, industrial development.
Okay.
Increases. Take the Lincoln, Nebraska example. That runway, a very fast vehicle now can operate out of that runway in Lincoln, Nebraska. Expect an economic impact, direct use in that community where somebody can now live in a beautiful place, decongested, but still be in any center of the world very quickly. We have identified our think tank, the High Speed Flight Group, highspeedflight.com, has identified over 20 new potential city pairs from Patagonia to the Nordic states in Europe, from places in Asia to South Africa, new centers of gravity, new hubs of activity that nobody thought about, where real estate development, where industrial development is thinkable today, where economies are very small. We have identified over 20 new rings of activity that could create a whole new balance of centers of gravity of economic activity.
Wow.
To all of you real estate developers, investors, industrial developers, are thinking that high speed might bring a new context and opportunities outside of the usual suspect hubs of air transportation, say New York, London. Consider that. But the other thing you brought up, Jeff, and I love how you think about this, is these vehicles need to operate in out-of-the-way places, say, not from downtown, like LAX type of airport, or even JFK. They need to be 100 miles away in more decongested areas. The advanced air mobility industry that is knocking doors very fast, very, very efficient vehicles, could be that first and last mile. At the end of the day, Jeff, the door-to-door speed is what matters. So if you fly a very fast aircraft, and I'll tell you an anecdote. I met a very, very wealthy industrialist who flies his own business jet across the world. And I met him in Paris a few years ago, and he came to the hotel fuming. And I said, how can you fume after you flew your own jet? Highest luxury from California to France.
Wow.
He said, I'm fuming because the last 2.5 hours I was stuck in traffic to get here. So a fast vehicle without the first and last mile that makes also the door-to-door journey fast is not as interesting. So out-of-the-way places connected by advanced air mobility, high-speed rail, light rail, interesting. And the second thing is the new centers of gravity. As another example, I had a very good friend who loved New Zealand and invested in New Zealand, but as he got older, American-based, the trips were getting longer and longer, and he's, with age, 20-hour journeys are not as pleasant anymore, and he stopped investing in New Zealand because could not get there quick. Imagine if industrialists and investors like that could get there in an hour. Some countries and centers, and I'm happy to share with you and the audience, the city pairs we have identified, amazing, logical places that if there is high-speed transportation, investors, people would move gladly. Southern Argentina, southern Chile, Patagonia, in some of the most beautiful places on earth to live, you could connect quickly with other
Hmm.
centers, I could live there.
Well, you're reminding me of, this is now kind of quaint. Some time ago, recent time I was in New York, I saw the helicopter service from, I guess it was the Lower East Side to JFK. And I happened to be going past when a helicopter was flying over the river. And you know, I suppose this leads us to the traffic management question, where if you have small, not so nimble aircraft doing that last mile between JFK and, Brooklyn, you have even more stakeholders involved. You have cities, states, regulators, the FAA, really a global governance system. A lot of people are going to hear the word global government and get very defensive, but you want your air travel to succeed, and then you got to have rules from point A to point B. So I wonder, in your exploration of this high speed flight regime, what's the regulatory perspective? As much as that may be the least exciting part, but we got to get them on board too. So your thoughts on that, especially the FAA and the United States government kind of regulatory environment for high speed flight.
Yes, so that's a very important piece, and it's the least exciting or black piece, but is there? We talked about two things. One thing important for technology to happen, including high speed flight, which is capital. But the other element is exactly what you are talking about, Jeff, policy and regulations. If a modality of transportation as high-speed flight comes into play, and from a policy making, from a contextual legislation is pushed back a priori, there's very little hope that capital will come in. Okay. The second layer is regulations. How can governments make sure that the uninvolved public, in particular, on any new modality like high-speed flight or advanced air mobility, is not put at risk by innovation. So regulation is very important. And here is something that you'll appreciate. I talked earlier that there is a phase coming up to us where these high-speed vehicles are going to be demonstrated. And we need to be smart about regulation. We cannot run too fast or get too far ahead of our skis to bring in a new modality on high-speed flight and pretend it's the same standard as the air transportation system that we have today in terms of safety. We have to be clear, we have to earn that. So regulation could be phased in a way, demonstrations moving to industrialization at a smaller scale, special missions, critical missions, national security missions, where the standard of safety is adjusted to the importance of the mission other than commerce, pure tickets, if you will.
Right.
And there is a path. There is a path to the regulatory expansion of the use of vehicles that is incremental, earns its keep in terms of safety, reliability, and particularly public safety for those not involved. And that's the decade I'm talking about.
Sure.
We take regulation with a sobering pace. I think the FAA in the US and other regulators across the world will understand that we are in a progressive curve until we get to common carriage, meaning you and I get a ticket on a suborbital rocket to business somewhere. Yeah. And that in the enthusiasm, and I've been guilty of that too in the last, say, couple of decades, the excitement of a supersonic, hypersonic new vehicle saving hours, days of our lives moving, and trying to have the airlines express interest. And we were missing a regulatory multi-phase step. We uncovered that in the last 5 to 10 years, and I think we're working with the FAA, Department of Transportation, and other entities across the world that say, okay, that makes more sense. If you start with a special mission purpose and level of safety, and as you gain data and statistical record heritage, we can move into on demand, and then we can move into common carriage schedule. Sure. And I think we have reached, industry and regulators have reached a balance of patience, realism, and the overarching safety umbrella that governments demand. And again, air transportation is such a high level of safety. It's a double word. It's so safe that everybody's happy with it, but it's also, if we try to get to that level too quickly, we'll stifle innovation. Sure. Anyway, there is method to the madness of high-speed flight.
Sure. Well, two things come to mind, and I want to mention them before I go into one so I don't forget. Boom, aerospace. And so I want to make sure we get to that. But when you were talking about this sort of 10-year period of sort of regulatory experimentation, for the lack of a better word, I think we're living through that right now with SpaceX. I wonder if you would agree with that, with the rate at which they're launching and testing, and of course, the rate at which they're blowing things up in the stratosphere and raining down junk into the Bahamas. So I wonder what you think of that, this kind of era as an example of a regulatory industry partnership. Do you think that is sort of an example of what will come next for the passenger high speed as opposed to so now they're optimizing for high rate, right? Rate of launch, not speed. Of course, with rockets, you get a certain minimum speed or you don't get very far. But do you think that's an interesting example of that regulatory change with SpaceX and the rate that they're testing?
Yes, I do. And you
Okay.
also mentioned Boom Supersonic, a company that I like very, very much, and I'm in full support. And you're touching probably both ends, the two ends of the spectrum.
Mm.
Boom Supersonic comes in at the closest end toward to the existing levels of safety. The possibility, the quickest example of a high-speed transportation vehicle that is going to blend seamlessly with a subsonic airliner.
Okay.
We have 30 years of Concorde experience with an amazing safety record. So when we talk supersonic, I'm very confident that decade I was talking about could be a couple of years, simply because propulsion and systems, and that will be a great way to get the people of the world to get rid of what I call the Mach 1 tyrant.
Sure.
Holding humanity hostage to this subsonic 4 or 5 day world, if you want to go far and back. It takes 4 to 5 days. Now, the other end of the spectrum, SpaceX, in particular Starship, and experimentation, innovation, I have to commend the regulator, FAA, AST, the Office of Commercial Space in particular, because despite of the risks that innovation has, what SpaceX call unscheduled these assemblies in flight.
Yeah.
Knock on wood, and statistically, no one in the non-involved public has been hurt. And that's the role.
Sure. Right.
Now, assets have been lost and investments have been insured and reinsured. That's fine. But public safety has been respected throughout the innovation process. Now, the vehicles themselves and the assets inside the vehicles, satellites, are subject to failure. But that is the price of innovation and progress. As long as the non-involved public or even the occupants, the public, space tourism vehicles, not hurt. And I think the balance between innovation and safety, there are risks. Space is risky.
Yeah.
But if you ask me, I'll give a solid A, maybe an A minus to where we are in that rating. But having said that, Jeff, your point is very well taken. Speed of innovation and progress in suborbital or space flights, especially we need to respect the safety element and lockstep with innovation.
Well, so two things I want to mention. I thought of it earlier, but didn't mention it. You talked about the rate of digital advancement, and how there's a generation now where instant video communication is expected at every time and place. And eventually they're going to video call someone around the world and then have to travel for 24 hours to get there. And that's going to motivate a demand for a faster flight. One of the other things the digital revolution is doing and accelerating every day is improve the speed of engineering and the speed at which things can be designed, analyzed, even manufactured in certain types of, computer-assisted, computer-controlled manufacturing and testing and so on. Even the idea of testing permutations of engineered systems in a virtual environment that itself has its own laws of physics and everything. That's a completely separate conversation, but I think it should be mentioned as one of the other factors accelerating everything. And maybe I should do another episode on that, because that is the virtual engineering world. Well, when you, for example, can train a model on a digital twin of some real space, 1 million generations of something can be trained in a week, where it would take 50 years, in the real world. So it's maybe another subject. But I want to get to, so one of the drives I used to make a lot was from Chicago to Madison. And it's a really boring drive. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's really long and boring. And when you drive that far, you can't help but notice it would be great to put a high-speed rail network along this road, right? And I think that at the risk of oversimplifying the challenges of building rail networks in the United States, I'm under the impression that some of the pressure against that is actually from the airlines because it would compete with them. Is that what do you think? Is that overly simplistic? How would you elaborate on that? Because I want to connect that to protecting existing lines of business in some corners of the airline industry against faster competitors. So from your seat, where do you see all of that? How does that play out?
That's interesting, and again, that could be another episode. The multimodality battles of equities and interests are not new. I've seen high-speed ferry boat companies in the Mediterranean compete with airlines. The high-speed rail industry in Europe. Most of in my experience, the discussion lays into the subsidies and who is subsidizing. The infrastructure for high-speed rail is very, very capital intensive. Yeah. And the reason to subsidize that, with understanding there's a demand signal for it, is when, the airlines, after the regulation and are pretty much on their own to make money, there's been a little bit of push and pull. Who is subsidizing what? But at the end of the day, the market, the users, the demand signal drives how those two blend in. If people want downtown to downtown high-speed rail, if they really want it, it makes sense, they'll get it. There are some cases that high-speed rail has been explored. Back to your initial comment on this call, because it can be done, because technologically you build a rail from point A to point B. But if they have missed out what the market really wants in terms of when you get there, what do you need to do to get to where you really want to go, the hotel or the business or your home? Yeah. First and last mile, the equities on the whole system and who subsidizes what infrastructure pieces was created some friction between airlines, rail lines, and also, again, the fast ferries in Asia or Mediterranean, some places, they all compete for infrastructure. At the end of the day, the infrastructure piece, just to double down on that, Jeff, you mentioned that earlier, is kind of the less exotic hidden piece that kind of sometimes is an afterthought when it shouldn't. Infrastructure, it should be the lead item and the long lead item that has to be considered as much as regulation. So I'm a big believer in multimodality because I think door is what matters. Back to my example, you fly very fast to Paris, but you're stuck in traffic for 3 hours. You're very upset. Yeah. So it's a full system in play. But let me pick up on what you said, the speed to business thanks to technology. And this is very, very recent. AI, quantum computing. Let me tell you, I was mentioning we need a decade to mature systems from demonstration to common carriage. I believe, and we are, some of us in industry, very busy recalculating. We are recalculating time and money to get that maturity. And I'm very optimistic that the time is going to be shorter, not longer. Okay. I'll give you an example for all of you out there technologists. If you follow Lockheed Martin and you saw the certification of the first Part 23 FAA certified vehicle digitally. Last year, we had the first vehicle type certificated without a single piece of hardware in existence. It was the first time a digital twin is being certified. Wow. When you look at that and you look at time is money and you look at data is safety, I think the decade ahead for common carriage in high-speed vehicles, we might start thinking of the 5-year window. I had meetings recently where we are starting to talk up to 2030, not 2035 or 4. Thanks to that speed to AI, machine learning, and quantum computing, we might be surprised how quickly we get to mature concepts into scalable, industrialized products.
Well, there's an example of that from my world, which is that earlier this year, the very first, and JPL people, correct me if I get this wrong in the comments somewhere, but the very first fully AI-driven rover drive on Mars was performed, where the onboard system designed the route and verified it and executed it, and then sent back the results. And I can think of some people who might be groaning right now if I got that partially wrong, but I do know that's largely accurate. And for that there are very few flight systems with that level of risk as the rovers on Mars, and to use a system like that on board there, really represents a big step forward. And NASA being the originator of so many technologies we use in aviation already, one can imagine a process whereby that advance becomes more regular on the ground here, or on the Earth, I should say, not on the ground necessarily, kind of extending the benefit of that work. So we're coming up on about 45 minutes here. I feel like we could keep going, but I want to kind of respect the audience's time and come to a sort of conclusion. Now, I can imagine that your concluding thoughts will be very optimistic about the near future of all of these different flight regimes. And but so maybe I will ask you in closing, what would you say to people who want to get involved in this and who want to be part of this changing world where we break the tyranny of Mach 1, which I love that term? What would you say to people who want to get into it or pursue training and what in certain areas? So how does someone get involved in this going forward?
Well, if I can have a closing statement for those of you who are interested in the conversation of how to fly fast from point to point on Earth, is the tailwinds that this conversation, this industry has today have never been seen before, from policy, regulation, standards, safety, and finance. This could be the time to get involved because we are within 10 years of change on how our humankind moves and relates to each other across the world. And this has been talked 20 to 30 years, but the window we are facing for all of you young engineers, technologists, investors, policymakers, regulators listening to this podcast, we have a window like we've never had before at all levels. And the technology and the speed that technology can transform a demonstration like Starship has done point-to-point 6 times, like Boom is doing with their XB-1. The transformation between demonstration that is possible. Hermios now is flying the quarter horse empty. Those are demonstrations. Before, to proliferate took a long time, a lot of money. Those time frames have been reduced. So all of you who want to partake in this conversation, you'll see results well within a decade. I could not say that 20 years ago. I say it now. And welcome on board our think tank, highspeedflight.com. Yes, how it sounds. Highspeedflight is harnessing the conversation today, Jeff. And you're now an honorary member of our think tank. Is harnessing this into actionable activities and welcoming new entrants from students to investors to policymakers, regulators, into making what has been demonstrated into a industrial scale available to the masses, a new modality of transportation.
Well, thank you. That's a very hopeful and inspiring conclusion. So I think that wraps it up here with episode 42 of the Space Madness podcast. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. In 6 months, we should do another one and talk about what's changed and really kind of nail down that rate of progress. I think that would be very interesting. So we'll keep everyone honest. Check in 6 months. Thanks again. Very interesting subject matter. And we'll see you all in the next one. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jeff.